Hello, everyone, and welcome to the weekly Human SOS show. We're on episode 71, trucking along towards towards our second year. Wow, pretty amazing. And we've decided we want to talk with you about what in the world is pound human SOS. Hashtag human SOS. Sorry about that old school comment there. Um, Hashtag human SOS. And what is it about? I think it's worth time to consider it. Just a reminder, everyone, to if you are viewing the live, that you will please join in by telling us where you're joining from. And we value your comments, questions as we go along so that we can dialogue, not just monologue. So, Anton, you want to open us up?
Absolutely. Before we get into the show, I just want to give you a shout out, Kevin, and I'll put you on the spot. Sorry, but Kevin graduated some really cool training, and he's almost equivalent of a special forces guy. We were just talking about this, yesterday, and age is just a number. This guy is tough as nails, and to tell a little bit about what you did, man. I mean, I'd love the audience to know more about it.
Oh, well, for those that don't know, I serve in our state guard, been doing so for 12 years, and really enjoy giving back to the community through that service. And one of the trainings one of our specializations in general is search and rescue, so that we can take care of our folks here in Georgia if something happens. And I completed a course on being a search and rescue specialist, and pretty daunting physically for a kid my age. And but was able to complete it, and I'm honored to be able to serve our state and be a part of this. And if you're in Georgia and get lost, uh, let us know. We'll come looking for you. So thank you, Anton. I appreciate you
You bet,
sharing
brother.
that
I bet.
while I'm
Sorry,
running
sorry
the
to put you on the spot.
well, it's a good practice. Welcome, Dr. Jesmond, and welcome, Moses. Glad to have you here today, and look forward to hearing your thoughts as we go along. So, Anton, uh, take us into it.
As always, folks, just introducing the show, me and Kevin and our partner V, who's on with us sometimes, we put this on for really geared towards HR professionals, but it's really for anybody that wants to learn how to manage the human operating system and how to help employees thrive more in between four walls of organizations. And the problem that we see is that stress is eating our, world alive everywhere. And
Mhm.
really not just stress from a standpoint of boss yelling in your ear. We're really trying to do a good job of showing people the big picture of stress and really showing all the different impacts and all the different areas that it can hurt and also all the different areas that it can come from. We've dove into conversations where it can be stress at home that's impacting employees just as much at work. And we can't separate people and say, well, because they're here at work, we're only going to deal with the work stress, and when they go home we don't have to worry about it. Well, no, if they're struggling at home, they need support from management, they need support from leaders and peers into how to be better, into whether just support and it's an ear to listen to, or support and giving them advice, support and providing resources. That's a really broad term, but the reality is, if we don't change course, we are going to struggle a lot more as a society as we do now. That's just the bottom line truth. I've been saying this for a really long time, and we are truly in a stress epidemic. We just keep calling it different things. Different things spring up, and we talk about mental health, which is a vital topic. It's so important. We talk about regular health. We talk about obesity epidemic. We talk about coronavirus and all these
Mm.
different things. But the reality is, it all boils under this one broad umbrella of stress. And it's just health combined, mental, physical, spiritual health. All those things matter. So that's what we talk about. And Human SOS is our system that Kev and I and V developed to help organizations. And what we do is we come in and we basically give people an assessment. Um, Dr. Jasmine, you're asking about what is the course. The best way to start right now is just to go to the prospectiveforce.com, the site you see at the bottom. And we open up with an easy 12 question pre-assessment, right? We don't want to waste people's time. And we're like, hey, if you score great on these 12 questions, guess what? Stress is probably not really impacting your life. But from there, if you do score poorly based on symptoms, then we get into a 60 question questionnaire that has 12 different areas. And based on that, we identify for you and we say, okay, this is where you're most, being impacted by stress and we need to focus on. So we believe in 10% approach, right? We have 10 brand or three different brands for both work, life, and health, and 10% fitter, 10% better, and 10% impact. And the point is that we need to find the right thing to go after, really the root cause of many things, and really address that with consistency. Because if we don't, then we really are not getting anywhere. We're chasing our tail and feeling like we're doing work, but it's just busy work, and we're really not getting anywhere. So today, we're going to introduce you a little bit about the concept of human operating system. We'll talk about, as always, in our beginning, about an HR article. We always talk about relevant news, and then we'll dive into all three, areas of the human operating system.
Anton, one of the Moses has put out a comment, and this is a prime example of what we're talking about. He says, my management asked me to take a break from work and joining them after the pandemic situation is better. He's laid off for a year. Wow, that's a prime example of some of the stress components that we are facing. And it's not just work, because I'm sure Moses being laid off doesn't affect just his job. So,
and people around him too. And Moses, feel free to chime in on this. I'm going to assume, but I'm assuming people in your life, your friends, your loved ones, are also impacted by this. It's not maybe a direct impact to them, maybe to your family it is, but everybody gets impacted when employers make decisions like that. And I'm telling you, layoffs, they don't work. Layoffs in the long term, I've looked into statistics. Somebody was asking about, do we have analysis on this? I've looked into statistics. A lot of the stuff that we do, we try to get data on. And that's why we do these assessments, to really figure out what's going on. But layoffs don't work. They just create stress on even employees that are remaining. And the performance drops by so much that the person that was laid off, the money that maybe they're saving, is then lost in the bigger picture, because the performance of other employees, because of added stress and added fear, overshadows what was saved by that layoff. So definitely they don't work. We talk about performance management and all those other things as well.
Welcome, Dr. Sharma. Glad to have you. Appreciate you joining us. I hope that you'll feel free to also comment, ask questions as we go along. So thank you for being here. And then Moses goes on to add a little more insight. So yeah, that you're out and now you're trying to figure out how to survive. Definitely understand that, and it's the real world that we're dealing with right now, and it's part of what we're trying to do to help individuals, teams, and organizations be able to deal with it.
Yeah, and he's Moses, I appreciate your humility, and he's saying, but I cannot blame the management. Because since the schools are closed here, I was working as an operations head, and I understand that, but maybe businesses need to pivot, right? If they're going to online, they need to maybe find ways to keep you on staff, maybe shift your duties or give you an option to do that. But the point is, there's more that companies can do. A lot of times they're taking an easy route. They're taking the old school route of what's been done for a long time in situations like this. But business has to evolve. If they're not evolving, whatever country you're joining from, let us know, by the way, what country your folks are joining from. We love to know where our audience is from. We always have people from all over the world that join our show. So what is the evidence that your model is working well? Well, that's a great question. I mean, honestly, you tell me. It's something that is the hardest thing right now to prove, right? How do you prove human experience is worth it, right? The evidence that we can show is going to be your retention and productivity, right? Those are the two most immediate things that we can dive into and talk about. If you manage employee stress and you really get into it, you are going to have more productive employees, and more importantly, you're going to have retention that is going to be greater than you had before, and most likely higher than industry, or better than industry average. And you tell me if that is quantifiable financially. It can be If you know the cost of hiring your employees, of retention of your
Yeah.
employees, if you know your employee acquisition and training and development costs, you can easily say, okay, we'll increase 10% retention. This is our return on their investment. But that's just the peanut stuff, right? And it's a American term, small things. If you look at things that are not necessarily connected, but culture, how do you measure culture? How are you going to be able to prove that culture
Mm.
is working? Your outcomes are going to improve, but in a good culture, you don't necessarily can't connect it to a specific event. It's when people give you extra 5% each month they step in because they care. They become, me and Kevin like to talk about this a lot. They become entrepreneurial spirits, not meaning that they're, going to start entrepreneurial businesses on their own, but they care about the business so much because the business cares about them, that now they're going to invest a lot more of their, aptitude and capabilities and effort into seeing that business succeed. Right? I hear bosses all the time talk about, well, you need to treat this like your second home. They treat me a whole lot better at home. So if you want me to feel that way about this workplace, you as a leader need to treat me the same way. So let's get into our presentation. Pop up the
Okay.
PowerPoint if you would, Kev.
Welcome, Rafia from Canada, and Moses is from India. So, and Dr. Jesmond had already told us she's in from Japan. So, we've got a
Awesome.
nice cross section of the world going with us today. All
And I
right.
love, I love, I love, Dr. Jasmine's direct questions, because that's the kind of questions we need to be talking about in the
Oh yeah.
boardrooms, right? In order to come in and get leadership to see things that way, we have to find ways to measure it. But this is the thing, right? What we're talking about today is the human operating system. We don't have a way right now to measure the human operating system. We can't hook up a person to a bunch of electrodes and say, this is how well this person's performing. I mentioned this last week and I said, I wish, this is a dream of mine. I wish you could hook a person up and say, exactly from data standpoint, their potential is X number, and currently they're performing at 50%, 35%, 100% of their potential, whatever it may be. If we could do that, you have no idea how many business problems we would solve, because we could understand people, their needs and actual outputs versus, using generalities. But that's impossible. We have to have faith and understanding that the human operating system is super important. So the way that we talk about here today, you're going to maybe look at it in a very different standpoint. And we're going to relate a human operating system to a computer system, because that's one of the most commonly understood systems in businesses is, the technology that we use every day. So we'll dive into what is the human operating system and why it matters. But let's first kind of cover the agenda real quick. First will be the HR news of the week. We'll talk about how to manage an employee who's been demoted. Right? That's one of the articles. It's one of the things that can be happening. And we don't often talk about the negative stuff, right? But leaders have to be prepared that this stuff happens. I've been in positions where this stuff happened, and I had to take over teams with managers that were demoted that were still there. And it's a very tough environment to work with. But if you do it the right way and you treat people humanely and you understand them, you actually can still have successful relationships. We'll dive into what is the human operating system. We'll talk about the three parts of the human operating system and why each part of those matters.
And those of you that are on here, if you decide you think someone would like to join us, if you tag them in the comments, they will see it in their notifications and can join us. They don't have to sign up formally to be a part. So feel free to do that as well, and share.
And if you folks think there's a great guest that we can have, right? For once in a while, we have guests. We love having guests, because me and Kevin are not necessarily the smartest people and don't claim to be. We're just trying to make a difference, right? This is our attempt at creating a human SOS movement. And we said, we see a problem. We may not have every answer. We may not have every solution, but we are going to kick, scream, and push as much as we can to try to make a difference in the world, because this problem isn't going away, and it's going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. Why? Because many of the symptoms that the problem of stress is causing are not connected to the root cause of stress. Something else is being blamed. And I talk about this like a tree, right? I reference trees a lot. I love oak trees for many reasons. My son's name is Oakley. And when we currently deal with problems in the workplace and life and society in general, it's kind of like we're treating symptoms, and there are leaves on the tree. We're going around and trying to chase every single leaf to solve a problem. It's impossible. There's too many of those symptoms around to try to solve them one at a time. So we need to address it at the root. If you want to heal a tree, if you want to fix a tree, you're not going to go treat every leaf. You're going to go to the root, change the environment of that which that tree is living in by supporting it, providing nutrients, providing water, healing it, and then all of a sudden, all those leaves above it get better. So that's really what human SOS is focused on. Let's get into the article, Kev.
Okay. One caveat I got to offer, Anton, is you talk about having the ability to hook up leads to people and get that feedback. Well, it's not realistic, but I have to say part of the reason we do what we do is that is an area of talent that we have. We may not be able to hook you up to leads, but because of our experience, because of the effort we put into designing what we do, we have ways to get as close as possible to that and help identify that. And our goal is to use our skills, our talents in a way to help identify those root causes. So, got
And
to
that's why we
throw
use
that
an
in.
assessment, right? That's why we have an assessment, and people are like, oh, 60 questions is so much. And even some of our team is like, that's a lot. And that's why we created the pre-assessment to make sure that we're not wasting people's times. But if you go to perspectiveforce.com, take the assessment on there. It has to be that deep because the problems are that deep. Stress connects to that many things. And in reality, we're probably even missing some that we keep figuring out as we go into this journey deeper and deeper. But talking today about how to manage an employee who's been demoted. So the article down there, if you guys want to read more, that's the exact link. You can type it in, take a screenshot, read it later. But this is where situations happen. Employee wasn't fired, right? Which is the right thing to do. Sometimes they just demoted them. Maybe it was too much of a load for them and they couldn't do it, or they step into a management role like often happens and they're not ready for management and they tend to fail, but they're a great person. Their character fits the culture. They do everything right, but for some reason they weren't able to perform. And sometimes that happens. A demotion happens. Maybe the even management tried everything they can. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. But what do we do at that point, right? Kevin, you've ever been part of environments where somebody's been demoted and stuck around?
Yes, I have. In fact, I have been in some ways a part of that, and it's tough. Part of it is recognize. One way to take some of the negative out of it is to recognize that one role is not more important than another. A demotion, quote unquote, usually means going from an official role as a leader to a lesser official role theoretically, or even out of leadership back into the team. At the end of the day, I don't care what your title is, who you are, you're replaceable and you're not more important than the rest of who is out there in terms of being needed. So the idea of demotion is unfortunately a construct that we've created and needs to really go by the wayside in terms of how we approach it. So,
And I've been on where I've had to demote people. I've been on the end where I was demoted, right? It almost broke me completely. And I've talked about this once in a while in the previous shows, and I was, the golden goose of the company. I was, everything I touched was amazing performance. Everything was great. And then a bunch of circumstances happened, including a new manager that I'm not going to just blame them. I failed to build the relationship with him to show exactly who I am. As I've grown in my years, I look back and I say, there's ownership that I can take. There's internal locus of control that I can have. But I was demoted from one manager position to another manager position. So it wasn't that bad. But the way that I was treated during that time, it became my exit and became my exit strategy at that point. I stuck around for one more year, but I was completely, not involved anymore. And that's that point number two, be empathetic, right? If somebody's going through demotion, understand that sometimes these things happen not fully in their control. There's other circumstances, and sometimes you just need to change positions for them to bring somebody else in, but there's not another position that you can put them into that's equal to the level that they were performing or used to. So a demotion has to occur. And sometimes it's not even a monetary demotion, it's just a title change. But to people like me who really care, who gave 70-hour work weeks on a regular to give the best performance possible, it destroyed me. It made me feel depressed. It made me feel like I was nothing. And it's because I didn't get that empathy. Or at least I didn't feel that empathy. And that's a really important point in number two. Point number one is set new expectations, right? Sit down with these people. And like Kevin just said, you're not necessarily less important. Show this person how they still can matter. Show this person how they're still valuable to the culture, to the team, to the company, and how their contribution's still going to matter, right?
Yeah, definitely. We again, big concept of human SOS is to bring human back into the picture. And all of what we're talking about here is how do we consider the human in this circumstance? Because I know our analogy is going to be related to technology because it works, but at the end of the day, we are a step beyond technology and computers, and how things affect us matter, and understanding how to address those. If you don't get that, then you've got a more basic problem that you've got to come to terms with.
And then the next point is watch for retaliation, right? Not every demotion is going to be positive, obviously. More are going to be negative than positive, especially if we didn't use empathy and we didn't reset those expectations. And you happen to be the person that was responsible for their demotion, there's going to be some retaliation. It's going to be like people are really emotional creatures. As much as we want everybody to be an even keel and logical, people have emotions. And when those emotions are hurt, sometimes we act in negative ways. And sometimes we act, as I would say, as children, right? We throw a fit and we do things that are out of our character because our feelings were hurt and we want to get somebody back, right? So you're going to experience retaliation. So as leaders, we have to pay attention to that. We have to watch out for that and see, is this now going to create some gossip on the team, right? Is this going to be where the employee is going to undermine me and all the things that I'm trying to do in order just to sabotage it versus without any other particular reason that besides them wanting to retaliate? The next point is offering a path towards autonomy or advancement. I like that one, right? Coming back to the positive, coming back to where how do we re-engage this person that we just demoted. So there's two things that people really want, and I think it's having, I guess three, in my opinion. There's many. I'm really focused on autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Those are the three intrinsic motivators outside of extrinsic motivators that we often talk about, like money, that people desire. So by giving them autonomy and advancement, we're helping them with those three. We're giving them either the freedom, or we're still showing them here's how to get back on top of the horse that you were on, right? If you still want to get back into management, let's correct some of the skills that maybe you were lacking. Let's train you better, give you different experience. Let me as your leader help you and get you back there as soon as possible once you're ready.
Well, and in some cases, the demotion may not be related to performance. It could be to circumstances in the organization for whatever reason, and offering an opportunity to grow into another role that might be better supported or whatever becomes valuable. And this is a way of even tying into some of our entrepreneurial desires. You know, it gives us a chance to explore other options, maybe even outside our original path, maybe a set of skills that transfer into a different direction, even.
Absolutely. And then, obviously sometimes a peer manager may be, demoted and become a direct report, right? At the same time, you need to understand some of the boundaries are going to change. And it's not just about you, because what can't happen is that now they're a direct report and the rest of the team may feel like, okay, well, they have a different relationship with the manager. They're going to them differently or they're talking differently than we get to. And that's not fair, right? We need to make sure now if they are your direct report, they're treated the same way as you treat the rest of the direct reports, even if you had a prior existing management relationship together when you were peers. So it's important to set those boundaries and let this individual know, hey, we're still friends when we go to happy hour, when we go for walks, whatever it is that people do, right? We're good there and we can maintain our relationship on the same level. But if that demotion happened and professionally we have to keep engaging, especially if you're my direct report, I need you to understand that you have to behave in the same way that we expect from other direct reports to behave.
Yeah, I experienced this challenge in my military career because I started out as an enlisted soldier in the State Guard. And in time, I went to officer candidate school, became an officer. And at that point, some of the very people that had mentored me and I had reported to before are now in a situation where they are by design reporting to me. And what is real critical in that situation is that they recognize that even though our roles are reversed, that it's still important that they show me the respect of that new role. But at the same time, in my relationship with them, I recognize their seniority, their experience, and show them the respect due for their history and so on. So it is a challenge to do, but it can be done. And interestingly enough, some of the people that I've had that relationship shift with are actually still very close friends. And when we're not in official capacity, we're first name, and talk to each other as friends. But when we go into our official role, then we follow the proper protocol, show the proper respects to each other, and so on. It can be done, but you have to be intentional about it. It might not, or even likely not going to happen as a natural byproduct.
Hit the next slide. Let's talk about the main points that we have today about human SOS, right? So three parts of the human operating system. Those are what they are. But before we even dive into details of this, right? Human SOS stands for Human Sustainability Operational System, right? It's really understanding how to work with human beings, unlock their potential, get them to perform the best that we can, and be able to sustain that performance, right? I can get people on a short term perform positively, meaning increase performance or do whatever, but usually it will not be, if it's done in a negative way, it will not be up to their potential. And most importantly, it will not be sustainable. So we talked about layoffs and things like that to open up the show. Unfortunately, Moses experienced that. And that is a negative performance increaser. It may instill fear in some people temporarily. They may perform a little bit better because they feel that their jobs now are in a line and need to do the best they can. It may help your financial performance on the short term because you've now cut somebody's salary and now they're not having to pay. But in the long run, that behavior is not sustainable. Firing and laying people off is not a sustainable behavior that will lead to optimal human potential and be able to sustain that performance. So three parts of the human operating system. I told you guys I will tell you a different way of looking at it. And we talk about the mind, body, and spirit. Those are very common terms that people talk about when we're discussing individuals. And I actually got this from Kevin 3 years ago when we first met. And I was writing on my board, if I would show you guys, I was having like a brainstorming session the other day. And I was like, well, how do we name this? How do we help people to really understand in relation to something that they use every single day? And that's a computer, right? So when we look at it that way, it's a coarse way of looking at it because we are way more amazing than a piece of machinery, but it's an easier way to understand some of the complex principles that we try to, show to leaders and to employees. And the mind is going to be the software, right? That's the different things that we load into the computer. Guess what? Neuroplasticity is the ability to change our brain. Just like a software, we can replace negative wiring with positive wiring. We can change people's positivity and make them feel better and feel like part of a team, make them feel like they're this great culture, right? That's software. Your body is your hardware, right? That's the operating system, not that, that's the, the nuts and bolts. It's your hard drive. It's your, I'm not a computer person, so you show him a limitation with knowledge of computers right now.
Is the computer tower, the motherboard, the video card, all of those pieces.
All of those pieces, right, that are not very easily interchanged. We can't just cut off an arm and put a different arm on. We can't cut off a head and put a different head on. That's what the computer is set up with and built with. And the spirit, I thought about this one really hard. I was like, what is the spirit? What would I equate the spirit to? And I was like, you know what? It's the most vital one of them all. It's the power source. Because if you don't have power, none of those things matter. If we're not taking care of employee spirit, and that can be both from a spiritual standpoint or just from an emotional standpoint. If we're not taking care of people in that way, we don't have the juice from those people to do the things that we want them to do. We can give them the best software, we can give them the best hardware, but none of that will be powered up. What are your thoughts on those in general, Kev?
I like it. Being a bit of a computer nerd, I can especially identify with it and see how the analogy works. And definitely, the spirit is the power. And unfortunately, in life, most of us, our power source is a battery backup rather than being on the real source. And therefore, we're not operating at full potential in a lot of ways. But definitely like the software analogy with the mind, because just like software can be updated and improved by changing the code, we, with the right inputs, can affect how our mind processes and functions in such a way that it works well or works better each time. And we start out with some bugs, software bugs, and we have to figure out those bugs and clean them up. And then we can write the code based on newer information to improve more efficiently, effectively, and to potential key. And I love the idea about potential, because, that is right at the heart of my vision and passion, is helping people find that potential. So I love it.
Absolutely. And folks, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this. What do you think about these things? Are we missing something? Is there something else that you think needs to be included into this human operating system, or is this more all-encompassing? What are your thoughts? And, hit the next slide. We're going to talk about, this is where I want you guys to engage. I would love to hear, why does the mind matter for organizational ecosystem performance? And before I even, get into that, what is an organizational ecosystem? It's everything within your corporation, organization, small company, whatever it may be, no matter the size. It's always an ecosystem where everything is contained. And what I mean by that is, if one person is extremely stressed out, right? If one human operating system is not performing well, it's not just impacting them. It's impacting everything in that ecosystem. The customer, the equipment, the culture, the other employees, management. At all times, it's going to impact them. So when we look at organization as this self-contained ecosystem, why do you all think the mind matters for that? Where does our mind, what stories can you talk about? What, examples can you provide where the mind is vital to organizational ecosystem performance? Let's start with you, Kev. What do you think?
Oh, well, again, my recent experience. Uh, there were a lot of limitations that could have been considered in this training that I was doing. Starting at my age to do this training in the first place, you kind of go, hmm. And ultimately, at times, not the whole time, but at times, what I had to do was change my thinking. That with the proper preparation, the right effort, all the right pieces, I could do whatever it was I was required to do. And that became an old saying we used, is mind over matter. And our minds are so important in our overall well-being, to a point that one of the principles that we all do well to consider is renewing our mind on a regular basis. And we renew our mind through different means and methods, including, one of the ones that common that we talk about is reading. Reading good material, positive material, is a way of renewing our mind. Meditation, prayer, all of those things are a factor in helping rewire, reprogram, so that we are able to be more effective in what we are supposed to do. Key issue there is making sure of doing what we're supposed to be doing, finding that place, and then growing in it remarkably.
And what I'm hearing from your great point is the word resilience, right?
Yes.
It's something that is part of our mind, but we are so reactive in organizations that we just try to fix things once they're broken, but we're not creating resilience in the first place to stop these things from being broken, right? Whether we're talking about mental health, whether we're talking about stress management, health in general, systems and processes, whatever it may be, we don't create that resilience proactively. And organizations, in order to battle the things that we're facing in our everyday life nowadays, with everything that's going on, we have to build resilience. I'm listening to, and I don't know if you heard about this, but listening on the radio right now about state of Oregon, and they're talking about how they're going to lower expectations for high school graduates and not require as much of academic excellence in order to achieve that, because everything that we've been going through. And I'm like, but are we teaching these kids resilience? Or are we teaching them that when things get tough, you expect the world to shift and change and adapt to how we are? But then when they get in the real world, the reality is the world doesn't shift and adjust around us. We have to adjust and we have to get resilient. So it may be kind of a little bit of an out there example, but that's just one of the things I saw this morning, literally just now in the news before I hopped on. I'm like, that's not resilience. All we're doing is crippling these kids and saying, we are going to keep lowering the standards just to make our education system look good, because now we're passing students and there's more of them graduating, instead of having students sometimes face some tough times and saying, hey, we got you, but we need you to get up to this certain point of expectation, because this is meant to prepare you for everyday life in the future.
Well, and one of the values related to the mind is that, for example, we focus on shifting the body, which is important. It's got to be there has to be congruence in all areas, but the value of the mind is that it can, generally speaking, shift the quickest to respond and then lead the way for the body to be able to follow on and recover, to repair, whatever. And so part of the value of the mind is its ability to respond quickly as needed and direct the rest of what we're doing in that regard.
And when we're talking about, the mind, the other way to look at it as well, I talk about this a lot, and it's neurochemicals, right? That's also part of our mind. And it's one of the things that is not being paid attention right now. We're talking about mental health, vital topic, but we're only talking about feelings and discussing problems, which is so important. But we can't talk about mental health without addressing the actual cause of mental health problems, which is a neurochemical imbalance. When our dopamine, our serotonin, two of our primary neurochemicals, are not where they should be, our happiness levels are down, our anxiety, our depression are up. But what are we doing? We're trying to solve it and forget all about this because there's not enough education in business world to understand this. And I keep saying it's time to close the gap between what science knows and business does. And when we're able to do that, which is what we're trying to do with Human SOS, we're going to see some great changes, because Kevin said the word congruence, and we both love that word because it's so vital. We have to approach all three parts in congruence, because thoughts create chemicals, but chemicals create thoughts. And if you just address it from one end of the spectrum, you're always playing an unwinnable battle. You're always going to have to go against the grain. It's kind of like pushing two rocks up a hill, right? You push one up, but the minute you let it go, it's going to tumble down. And now you get, because you have to focus on the other one. That's not how we need to approach mental health. And that's not how we need to approach the mind in the business world. We need to understand each individual's, situation. And instead of throwing these cookie cutter approaches and saying, here's one size fits all solution, let's understand what each person's issue is and really help them to solve it that's best for them. Let's get into the next one. So the next one is the body, right? And this one is, I can talk about this one forever, because I've been in the body space for a long time as a, health coach, personal trainer, worked with many trainers and taught many coaches. But this is not just about from a standpoint of health. That one is understood. The astronomical costs of health insurance to employers right now would pay for everything we're talking about overnight, because of how much we would reduce it, is what I'm saying. The return on the investment on just healthcare cost reduction from working the human operating system in a different way and utilizing human OSs to support the human operating system. But this is where our body comes in. Think about people's confidence. right? Think about how a person shows up to work every day, especially if they're presenting and doing things like that. Think about ergonomically. If person's experiencing pain all the time and you're not supporting that properly as an employer, what is that doing to their performance? But do you ever hear employers or employers talk that way to their employees and saying, "Hey, I feel like your posture's hurting. We need to get you some support because you're in pain all the time, or you're in back pain. Let's address that." Right? If it's not a medical necessity, employer doesn't really care. But that's impacting them every single day. You tell me, Kev. I mean, you're pretty sore right now from the things that you've been going through. Like, is it easy to focus? Are you as much focused on everything else in life as you would be if you weren't?
Oh no, I am definitely focused on some sore muscles, and I go to move right now, even though over my training time, movement was essential. Right now, when I go to move, my body says, "You want to do what?" And so I have to become intentional just to do some normal things because I have stressed and challenged my muscles. And so, yeah, our body. Well, I mean, think about it in these terms. We've now created a whole new area of safety called ergonomics, and it has nothing to do with urgent medical need, but everything to do with effects on the body and our work environment. And we're finding out how important. I mean, um, carpal tunnel because of people typing, and there are even now injuries related to people using phones and tablets in their thumbs and so on. So yeah, the body has to be a part of the equation in this. Otherwise, our performance can suffer remarkably.
And you can I can get into things like oxygen delivery and things like that that are vital to endurance. Obviously, we're talking about nutrition, how people eat and the things that people eat. This one is so common, and I see it all the time still. They're worked with a lot of sales teams, and just people that are under a lot of pressure is another example to talk about. When they try to help them out, what do? They get them donuts, right? Pizza and donuts. We're going to bring everybody to support you on this rigorous day of activity. And the problem is that that's a short-term burst of positive energy, but after that comes a massive crash. And people's performance really, really drops after that. But average business professional doesn't think about it that way. They're thinking, I'm doing good something for my people. And trust me, I love the effort. I love that you're trying to invest into your team. But let's get a little bit deeper with our education and knowledge and really consider what is the long-term ramification of this choice. Am I actually helping performance? Or when bosses walk in with a box of energy drinks and like, oh yeah, I got you guys energy, we're gonna juice you up and make you feel great. But then the person feels like crap 2 hours later or the next day, or it really impacts them negatively.
Yeah, I think part of that is a greater symptom of other root causes, and that is we're too often so focused on living in the present that we lose sight of the future. And I understand you can't always chase the future per se because none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. But one of other favorite topics we have is balance. You've got to have a firm grasp and be present fully now. But especially as a leader, if you don't have an eye out at the 30,000-foot view looking down the road a bit, you're going to fail as a leader at some point because you're not anticipating what might be coming and considering how to take care of yourself and your team in that process. So, short sightedness is, yeah, the donuts and goodies like that. The long view would be, yeah, but if I do this all the time, I'm going to compromise people's physical well being on my team and set a bad precedent.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Let's hit the last one here. And one that I think people don't talk about enough is the spirit, right? And this is where I would tie in the vision, right? Having a vision for the company that fuels and connects to visions of individual employees, that's that power source, one of many, right? We can talk about the spiritual aspect of this and having people giving people the freedom to do what they need to support their religious beliefs. That's another component. But to me, I think this one is the most connected to culture. It's the one that will really power everything else, will really drive everything forward. And even when other things are not perfect, if there's that vision, that deep rooted energy from within each person to do better, to have purpose for what the company's accomplishing, you are going to have much better performance than if you just focus on bells and whistles and everything else in the system. I know this one's close to your heart, Kev. What are your thoughts on,
Well,
the spirit aspect of it?
I agree completely. And what we've done culturally is said there. In fact, there is a body of thought and people that say, well, the spirit doesn't even exist, so it's a non-entity. On the other side, those that say, okay, yeah, I agree that we have a spirit component, but we can't talk about that because it might offend someone because people's religious beliefs. And again, that is a leadership fault, not a situation that is true. It, we can, as we learn to grow individually, we can respect and accept other people and their views and what they do to a point. I mean, there has to be limitations for any of us. For example, I do self-limiting for me on what topics I will approach in certain situations, not out of fear, not out of lack of confidence in where I come from. It's out of respect for other people. And so we've got to encourage that there is an option. In other words, we've gone from not talking about it to not accepting it as even a possibility. And for a large majority of people, there are those people think about a spiritual concern or a spiritual aspect to their life. It may vary greatly, but if we tell people in our work environment, you cannot acknowledge that part of who you are, we have then diminished their potential. We have diminished their performance because sometimes the attribution of accomplishment or overcoming something has to do with the spiritual part of our life, but we are so restricted in being able to acknowledge and have that as part of our life. And so any culture that does that, that's your choice. And if you're a business owner, a founder, you certainly have the choice. But boy, I hope I don't stir up a hornet's nest on this one, Anton. But if people choose to go that approach, they are doing a great disservice to themselves and to anyone in their organization. Yeah, I know it's the easy way to just say, well, it's too controversial, so we won't talk about it. It is uh, it's the lazy way of approaching it. It is not approaching it as a leader. A leader's not afraid to address those areas of life that are challenging because we all have them, and to not acknowledge that and not give them place is pretty foolish.
Those are such great points, brother. I mean, I'm gonna ask your opinion on this. What do we do about it? How do we start to shift back to where it's okay to have these conversations? What do we do as leaders to open up these channels of communication?
Wow. Okay, I'll get on something that I'm convinced more and more every day that is essential, and I think that the reason people react and become defensive in this area is because for especially this area, if we challenge them and question them in this area, it isn't just about an opinion or a stand. It's about their value as a person. And the problem with a great majority of people that are around us and about us, and we see this evidenced in social media, is if you don't agree with someone, respond in a very defensive manner, and it depends on the person how reactive they are. But we see it all the time, trolling and treating people ugly. And I really believe in my heart that the source is that there are a lot of people trying to either prove that they're not who they think they are, or trying to prove their value as who they are. And if we can ever get to a point where people are not trying to prove their value, and that their identity is not tied up with one thing, such as work, that's a big problem, is that people's identity are tied up in their work. They lose their job, get demoted, something happens, their whole life crashes. And so determining and understanding where your value comes from and settling that goes so far to helping people then respond and relate to each other much better. Because when you aren't worried about having to prove your value and defend who you are as a person, your reactions become very, very different. And I speak from experience. I'm not talking about some theoretical. I have lived this. I've even written an article about it, and how
Are you talking about the
impactful.
cocky rooster?
Yeah, the cocky rooster. How impactful it can be, especially in our work relationships, because we in work relationships are forced into relationships that we might not otherwise choose. So if this issue is a core problem for us, it's going to show up in work environments likely, because we don't choose who we work with.
Such great points, brother. I mean, I really like how you're talking about people considering multiple points of view and not feeling that just because somebody has a different point of view, yours is wrong. You don't need to attack them. You don't need to come after them. But that's what stress does, folks. Stress, you'll
Mm-hmm.
hear me say this all the time. Two parts to our brain, two parts to us. We have this little lizard brain that's designed to survive, designed to compare, designed to, do these animalistic responses and reactions, right? And then we have the powerful human brain that's designed to be proactive, designed to have intelligence, right? And what is intelligence? Intelligence is many definitions. I like Fitzgerald, Scott Fitzgerald's a writer's definition. It's not the exact quote, but intelligence is ability to hold two opposing concepts in your head at the same time and still being able to function, right? If
Mm.
we're stressed, we can't do that. When our world is what it has become, when our world is so stressed to the gills, we are becoming extremely polarized, and we feel that it's right or wrong, left or right, Republican, Democrat, whatever country you live, I'm sure you have something like that. And it's not about that. It's about understanding what are the best views of each of this person. How can we find congruence? There's that word again, of uniting these views, taking the best parts of them, or even letting people to keep their views and us still function as a society, us still function as a workplace. Because if we don't, we get a bunch of group things. Excuse me. We get a bunch of cliques. We get a bunch of these situations where people are afraid to speak up. They're afraid to change direction. And then we have, these stories from history, what happens with groupthink. We have these stories of how catastrophes could have been prevented, but somebody didn't speak up because they didn't feel the environment wasn't inclusive of their views. They had to shut up because maybe it was about spirituality that started that. Maybe because they can't share their views from that, they felt that I don't belong here. My views are not valued. So now I also won't speak up about things that have nothing to do with spirituality because I just don't feel valued. I don't feel that my views are important.
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, people that know me know I have some very strongly held beliefs in a spiritual sense, but I can work with anyone at any time, including people. I've had people that come to me and they want us to talk about something spiritual, and they say, "Well, I know this may offend you," and I go, "No, it may not change how I view things, but it's not going to offend me, because what we're talking about doesn't determine my value. I am me. I am valuable as who I am, so I can deal with most anything. Now, there are times I will choose not to expose myself to some things because going back to the mind part of things, garbage in, garbage out. Just like you put garbage software in a computer, you're going to get garbage performance out. Our mind's the same way. But at the end of the day, I have my very strongly held beliefs, but I do not have to get others to accept it, nor even believe it, or even acknowledge it to be okay with who I am. And the freedom I have found is I am okay with who other people are, regardless of who and where they are in their life. And I'm able to then possibly have a reasonable conversation, which may lead to a shift in my mindset or a shift in their mindset. But at the end of the day, it's not going to change my value as a person.
And
And
it's coming back to the two things that you mentioned, right? You don't have to prove who you are or prove who you're not. You're comfortable with, with who you are, and you don't have those insecurities. And I think that that's what so many people struggle with. They have these insecurities from childhood. They have these insecurities from poor relationships, poor bosses, whatever it may be, and they keep carrying that around. And
yep,
every time we stress out for many of hundreds of different reasons out there, it really just blows those insecurities out of proportion. It brings that lizard brain out. We put our guard up. We feel like everything that's said that's different against what we believe is an attack on our belief. And that's why I come to you for advice, brother. I mean, you're so even keeled, and I know you say that you weren't always that way, and I appreciate that. But that's what comes with that kind of belief in yourself and who you are and your faith.
well, and I think it's interesting. I hadn't even thought of this until now. One of my favorite quotes that I use, something that I developed, is the dragons in our life, in our mind, that cause us to be fearful and react poorly, really are lizards that have been exaggerated. And it just clicked in my head. You're talking about our lizard brain.
Mhm.
Okay, our lizard brain is kind of an instinctive thing, and it's not designed to control us. It's designed to be a factor. It is our human brain, which should be driven and affected by our spiritual components. That when that's functioning right, we keep in mind that our lizard is a lizard, is not a big dragon that we need to be fearful of. And so I got to think on that one and see how I can develop it a little bit. But I'm watching now so many people feeling like they have dragons to slay in their life, and they really don't. And I know it feels that way, but there are ways to get the proper perspective of the lizard if we are about what we're talking about, that congruence. Part of the way we can keep the lizard brain from becoming a dragon is these other inputs and them being healthy. Such an important key part. Why it's important that the human operating system, which is three parts, is healthy in all regards, not just one, not just the other, and not divided between work and life. Folks, I know we work a lot. I know we spend a lot of time with colleagues and things, but that's still not life. If that's life for you, you're not going to be good at work. You're not going to be good at life. You're going to find yourself torn. And better that you are learn to be about you and your life, and then how to integrate work as part of it along with everything else. Congruence in our life, congruence in our work makes such a difference versus where we're at now. We're still in the uh, uh, concepts of work that were developed and with my generation. Manage everything, including people, and have work and life separate, because thus necessitating work-life balance, which is a myth. It won't work. And so the more that organizationally and personally we understand this human operating system, I mean, that's what we're talking about, is getting that as a grasp and it becoming central to the culture of our work and everything else.
I know we're almost out of time here. I just want to thank everybody that stayed with us for the show, and I just want to leave you with this. I have to obviously convince you why it's important to care about the human operating system, right? Not even our system that we use to help the human operating system, just human operating system in general. Think about it this way. Has it ever happened to you? And I know it has because it happens to everybody, where your circumstances haven't changed. Your job, your relationships, and all other aspects of your life haven't changed. But you woke up a different day and you went from feeling really happy and confident, like you were you needed to be, to feeling completely like you're lost and you don't know what's going on. Job seekers feel this all the time.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
been a job seeker for a while, and you're like, okay, it feels like my ducks are lined up, interviews are happening. The next day, there's been no response. Nothing's been different, literally not a different thing that occurred. But the way you look at the environment completely changed, and the way that you respond and interact with your environment has now changed. Why? What gives? You changed. The chemicals in your brain, the thoughts, the conversations you're having with yourself, your physical structure, whatever it may be, those things changed. Your mind, your body, and spirit changed. And now all of a sudden, it seems like the environment is different. And that's a very dangerous road to get on. I've seen depression start that way. I see all sorts of bad things start the way, and ultimately bad outcomes happen that way. So if you've ever lived that and you've ever experienced that, you have to understand there's an explanation for it from the human operating system.
And as we close out, please consider the assessment. One of the things you'll notice about this assessment, it is not about just work. It's about different elements of our life. And it is, if it does nothing else for you, I hope it's satisfies some curiosity and gives you some insight. You're all that you're risking to do it is to share your email with us. And it comes to us, we control it. So you're not going to get beat up with email and all that. But the insight that I think you gain will be valuable. And some of you, that's all you need to be able to address it. But if that starts you down a road to consider, hey, I didn't realize this, I would like some help individually for my team or for my organization, that's where we come in. And we want to step in where you feel like you can't take it further. And so we help you take it to the next level with the idea in mind. Our goal as in any organization or person we work with is to work ourselves out of a job as quickly as possible, not to prolong the misery and therefore continue to collect revenue. That's not our heart, our goal. And rest assured that if either of us ever goes there, the other one of us will call it, and the rest of our team. I mean, it is the heart of what we do. We want to. That's why we call it the human SOS movement, because it's going to take a lot of people to turn this big ship that we have to hopefully help us recover before more damage is done. And if we don't, you can rest assured the consequences are going to be pretty significant in the workforce and everywhere else.
Yeah, well said. All right, folks. Thank
All
you so
right.
much for joining.
Join us next week. Hey, we'll be back here next Tuesday with another topic in relationship to hashtag human SOS and all that's about it. And so join us, invite a friend, watch for the announcement when it comes out. Thanks, everyone. Have an amazing rest of your week. God bless.